Hey kids, how's it going? We're microdosing legendary investors today, Max Kaiser.
Oh, right. Yeah. Legendary investors. You see that phrase a lot now because the legendary investors are all moving into Bitcoin.
Right. And I saw someone say there really needs to be a meme for a legendary investor because like how many are there? You were a banker. How many legendary investors are there for you in your years of working on Wall Street?
No, there's probably about 50 in total, I would say, over the past 40 years, post World War II era. And I mean, you can go and name them all, but there are about 50 people that would qualify as legendary investors. So Paul Tudor Jones is obviously one of them. He's moved into Bitcoin. And you've got Bill Miller over at
Leg Mason? He was
Leg
at Leg Mason.
Mason, right?
Yeah.
He's a legendary investor. He's already been in Bitcoin for a while. You've got now Stan Druckenmiller, who is definitely a legendary investor. He's now moved into Bitcoin. Conspicuously absent from the list would be Ray Dalio, and that seems to be a guy who is a slow learner, but will eventually get in.
Right. Of course. What do you think Jesse Livermore thinks? Speaking of legendary investors, I guess he's the most legendary of all. So, what would he think of Bitcoin, Max?
Well, he looked purely at the price, right? So Jesse Livermore kind of invented the modern speculator, and the idea that he was at one point richer than J.P. Morgan, I believe the legend goes, and he got that way by speculating,
Uh huh.
and he famously shorted the market right before the crash of 1929. Made a lot of money. He made and lost incredible fortunes on four times. Eventually, at the coat room of the Biltmore Hotel, I believe it was in New York, he shot himself in the head, and that's how he ended his life. But I think he would have looked at the price action of Bitcoin and he would have recognized this as an incredibly powerful bull market, and he would be long.
Right. So, how's everybody out there? I'm going to go read your comments and say, what you think of legendary investor Stan Druckenmiller getting into Bitcoin. We're going to talk about that this weekend on Orange Pill Podcast, the full edition, not the microdose, but the full dose of Orange Pill Podcast on Sunday. We'll be talking about that. But, the other thing we're going to be doing is on Friday night, we're going to be having some Amarula and I see, the autofocus is on, so there it does go in and out a little bit. Sorry about that, but there's nothing you can do about autofocus really. And Amarula, so that's an elephant right there on the bottle, and I'm gonna try to drink this whole bottle on Friday, the 13th of November, with you guys on the Sun Exchange cocktail party. Make sure you send in your questions because we're basically not going to be taking too many live questions. I'm just going to be pulling from the comments and questions you've already submitted to the Sun Exchange Telegram group. So go there and join that. I think we can only accept 100 people at a time on the Zoom, so it's going to be first come first serve. If you get on there that day at the right time, I'm going to be posting the link about I said I guess about 15 minutes beforehand, and it's first come first serve on Friday. What do you think, Max? Are you gonna have any Amarula?
Oh yeah, it looks awesome. We had it first time on a flight once, and when they were just rolling it out, this cocktail, and it was a big promotion, and airlines were serving it, and it's very smooth, and it's also South African.
Right. So I'm going to go over to Coin Market Cap and look what the price of Bitcoin is. It is currently up 4.05%, and the price is $15,897.76. That's up 11.81% this week alone. It apparently had touched $16,000. Any comment, Max, on the price action?
Well, yeah, I mean, recently it kind of dipped below 14,000, to see if any sell stops were triggered, and no sell stops really were triggered. So it popped over again, and now it's testing a higher prices. So as I've been saying, there's not a lot of supply between this price and 20,000. And so I just think we're going to see 20,000 in the near term, which would be a new all-time high. That brings in a wave of media exposure, and that will give it a pop up to 28,000 probably in pretty short order, where you might see a pause. But it's just stepping up. The way these markets work, you've got market makers, right? And they're trying to build their inventory all the time. So in order to get some cheap inventory, sometimes they'll take the price down a bit to see if anyone, it triggers a sell stop. This would be somebody who's put an order to sell automatically at a certain price. And they'll find if there's any sell stops down there, they'll try to trigger them and take that in as inventory.
Hmm.
And so they did that, and nothing really materialized. There's nobody really selling. So then they're like, okay, then we got to take it the other way. We're going to take it higher, and that's what they're doing now.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. And 16,000 is a good price. Of course, at 20,000, as we've heard from many people in the whole Bitcoin space behind the scenes, the liquidity providers and stuff, there's a huge amount of buy orders up at 20,000, because I know it sounds very counterintuitive and it's hard to get your head around, but there are more buyers at 20,000 already waiting for it. And those are the institutional investors and pension sort of money that can't really get in at 10,000 because of the size of the market cap and things like that. They need it up above 20,000 until they could start buying.
Well, it's mostly about momentum traders. So a lot of traders, hedge fund traders, are trying to make high gains in a concentrated period of time.
Hmm.
So if you can make a trade from 20,000 to 28,000 in 2 weeks, that's a great percentage move. Annualizing that move, you're saying, wow, I'm doing fantastically well. So typically this type of situation, things that make new highs go on to make new highs because there's no resistance above that old high. So there's a vacuum of there's nobody has ever owned it at that price. So there's no sellers. There's just a vacuum until and then there's the momentum of having gotten to the new high. Then there's the whole media cycle of we're at a new high. All these things converge, and suddenly you go from 20,000 to 28,000 pretty quickly. And I think at that point there might be a bit of a pause, but I don't see anything. I don't see any selling between now and then.
And again, I believe it was Stan Druckenmiller who said he likes Bitcoin really a lot at this price. Uh, Paul Tudor Jones also said he likes it at this price. I always like stacking on dips. Of course, I was happy that it stayed in that $9,000 to $11,000 range for quite a while. The dollar cost averaging was good, and then of course when this price spikes like this as a daily dollar cost averager, you feel a bit of like panic. You're like, you kind of get angry. Like you're kind of like, oh man, that sucks. Like I'd rather have, like, for the same amount I got like 0.2 Bitcoin yesterday, and now I'm only getting 0.18.
Right. Well, that's the classic kind of division between value investing and growth investing or momentum investing. So value investors, put Warren Buffett in that camp. They love market sell-offs. They love when market crashes because
Okay.
they can buy stuff cheaper. Right. They're value investors. Their conviction is very high, and they believe in the business. And if the business is down, the stock is down 40% or more, then it's a bargain. And Warren Buffett has written extensively on the mentality of those who don't seem to understand that it's better to buy a dollar for 50 cents than buying a dollar at a dollar or a dollar 20 cents. Then there's got the momentum investors and the growth investors, and that's a whole separate category of investor. And for that group of investors, they like to buy things on the way up. They like to buy the momentum. They like to, because in their view, if they can capture several of these momentum plays in a year or two, they're going to outperform the value investor. Now, certainly in the last year or so, value investing has underperformed growth investing by one of the sharpest margins ever in the history of stock markets. So, but anyway, getting back to Bitcoin, it depends on what you are psychologically more in tune with, and then to stick with that. So, if you're a value person, like to buy on dips, then stick with that and you do great. If you're a momentum person, like to buy the tops, that's going to work too, because ultimately the price is still going much, much, much higher. It's just a matter of getting in,
Yeah.
getting long, and getting long, get long. Don't be wrong, get long.
Yeah. Yeah. When I go shopping for clothes, I tend to buy pretty expensive, really well made classic stuff. Therefore, because it's going to last me 5, 10 years and it's not going to go out of style because I get classics, I always buy at the summer or winter sales when it's 50, 60% off, right? Because why would I buy it at 100% price? Some people just have to get it then and wear it and flaunt it at whatever summer party. But I just like to wait at the end because I know I'll be wearing it for years. So why pay why pay 100%?
Absolutely correct. If you want to look like you have a lot of money, dress in the classics because the people with a lot of money don't like to waste their money on clothes.
That's true. That's true. And I can't wait to break into this Amarula. It's just reminds me of that Virgin Atlantic flight so much. We flew from New York to London in like business class, and they came around and said, "Would you like a glass of Amarula?" Oh, I guess on Virgin it's called upper class. They don't have first class or business class. They have upper class.
Right.
So I said, sure, I'll try this. I don't know what it was. I mean, we were landing at like 8 in the morning. So I was like, whatever. Yeah. There's so many things. That's the thing I miss about flying, right? Because it is the least conformist, most tolerant sort of uh, you know environment you're ever in. Like it's totally normal to have a shot of amarula at 8 in the morning. Like nobody looks at you bizarrely. But like if you went to the restaurant down the road and said, "Can I have a shot of whiskey?" People would be like, "It's like 10 in the morning. Why do you want a shot of whiskey?"
Yeah, it's like Vegas, right? There's no time zone. Everyone is just expressing their themselves in whatever way, and it's like Vegas in the sky.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I JFK is the only place I've done that where I've had like a martini at like 9 in the morning, and
Hmm.
you just like nobody bats an eye, and like everybody should have that sort of tolerance for people's behavior around them instead of this sort of intolerance we're seeing everywhere. This I don't really want to bring up the election, but it's just like so shocking how insane, to me, because we've been away from America so long, so we're not really too involved in this whole partisan thing, and, and especially the partisan hate imposed via the cable news, right? So when you're not in that mindset, it's hard to really understand the hysteria and so when I come back and I see everybody in hysterics, it's hard to sympathize with the people who are crazy. And on my Facebook page, most people live and operate in one bubble. They're either all Democrat or all Republican, right? My family happens to be half Republican, half Democrat. So I naturally have to be tolerant to all views. But then some of my Democrat followers are old. They're mostly just old friends and family. The Democrats are like completely 100% totally intolerant to hearing anybody say anything positive about Republicans on my page. And it's so weird. Like, I have the family members that are Republican, they comment on stuff all the time and, say whatever, but they never come on the my page and call like my Democratic friends and old family and call them fascist or Nazis or something like that. But just like I posted a link to that Gabriel Byrne story, and my cousin, who's a Republican, said, you might not like the way Trump speaks, but I thought he was a great president. I think he is a great president. And like some guy I knew from London is just like jumps on the page and he's like, "You're a white supremacist. Are you white? Are you white?" And I'm like, what is this for? Like, why are you doing this on my page? Like, what, like, why would you even ask that? All he said is he thought like Trump is a good president. And like, that's a sign of somebody who's actually physically, mentally, psychologically lost their mind.
Yeah, no, no question about it. The social media and politics has become, very toxic, and I have a formula to deal with it myself on social media. I just have a bunch of memes that I use, and I have muted over 37,000 people on my Twitter account over the past couple of years. So it's my timeline's pretty clean. It's just focus on Bitcoin really, because Bitcoin is the
Yes.
Uber. Become your own nation, become your own bank, become individually sovereign, secede from the nation state. I don't think the nation state. One thing I'll say about this election is that it's one step further down the road of the nation state dissolving completely. Not just in the U.S., but all nation states everywhere. They're all in one the phase of collapse because fiat money has run its course. It's never worked over 300 years. It's not working now. And up until now, there was no substitute, except for gold. But gold is easily confiscated and easily outlawed.
Yeah. That's what you might say about Ray Dalio when Ray Dalio just Bitcoin today. Was it on CNBC or Bloomberg or something like that he did this?
I saw this story on CoinDesk.
Okay. So, he said, "Oh, the reason why he doesn't do Bitcoin is three reasons because it you can't use it." That's the most bizarre thing. By the way, Ray Dalio, so you understand, is it has the biggest hedge fund in the world, certainly, or maybe it was. It's down quite a bit now, but out of Connecticut, and he has a huge position in gold. So he himself is a gold investor. So he is betting against the dollar, but he's saying that you can't use Bitcoin, but you can't use gold either, but as a store of value, and that's what Bitcoin is as well. So you're using it, holding it is using it.
Yeah. Plus, you can use Bitcoin. You have a debit card or a debit card backed by Bitcoin. You can use it. Issued by Visa, right? We know that Fold is a company where you get a Visa card that you're spending Bitcoin, and many of these are available. So that's just patently wrong. It's like Ray Dalio saying, "Well, the sun doesn't rise in the east." Okay, well, that's wrong, Ray. Sorry, you're just wrong. Okay, so that's point number one. Point number two, he claims, well, it's too volatile. Well, that's also not really a point because Bitcoiners are happy it's a trade off. I'm happy to accept some volatility from $1 to $16,000, right? I'm happy. It's like Ray would saying, this stock I bought at $100, it went to $1,000. I hate it because it's too volatile. Right, Ray, you're a moron, right? I mean, the thing's gone from $1 to 17,000. How could it get there if it wasn't volatile? It's going to 100,000, 200,000, 400,000. How can it get there without volatility? Number one. Number two, if you understood Bitcoin, you'd understand that there's a trade-off here. We're happy that we've got a skyrocket going to the moon, what you call volatility, in exchange for hard money that's absolutely finite, unlike anything else that's ever been seen or thought about in the history of humans, unconfiscatable, immutable, right? So it's got all these things. And oh, by the way, you've got to accept it's a little bit volatile on its way to making you a freaking billionaire. You got to accept the downside of a little volatility. Okay, so that's stupid. Just patently stupid. I don't want to just, throw terms around glibly, but I think if you look up the definition of stupid, Ray Dalio would be the guy that you would think of. So number three is he's saying, well, what if states ban it? Well, again, Ray, there's something called game theory. It's a Nobel Prize winning concept in economics. You may want to look it up, where it's impossible to ban Bitcoin in a world of where everybody is locked in this global competition for economic supremacy. And you already got 3 or 4 countries that are graduating toward Bitcoin right now. If the U.S. wants to stay relevant, they've got to start mining or hoarding Bitcoin as a strategic reserve, or they're going to be left in the second world, the third world, the fourth world. Who knows where they ultimately bottom out? But they're not going to be in the first world, right? We got a few countries now that are leading. Iran is definitely in the first world of Bitcoin. It's got a position, and a couple of others.
Right. Some people, for some reason, don't know what your T-shirt says. It's Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks.
Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. That's the famous headline in the Times. What is hard coded in the Genesis block of Bitcoin from Satoshi Nakamoto. So remember, Bitcoin was birthed during the financial crisis, and it is a political statement, amongst other things. Bitcoin, and this kind of proves it. And it's a very famous headline that was hard coded into the Genesis block.
And I might add also about Ray Dalio, who is, like I said, his Bridgewater Capital is the biggest hedge fund in the world. So for a hedge fund manager to say he doesn't like volatility
Again, right? Yeah,
is pretty
exactly.
absurd, right? I mean, that's why they exist. That's how they profit is volatility. If there were
Well,
no
yeah.
volatility, he wouldn't have any money, right? Like,
Well, if okay, here's an asset that is moved a 9 million%. Okay, if in fact you're a hedge fund guy and you to choose not to participate, that's clearly you're not doing your job as exposing the fund to the best performing assets in the world. So that's he's not doing his job. Number one. Number two, the word hedge fund implies hedge, right? If it's too volatile for you, Ray, put on a freaking hedge. You're a hedge fund. I mean, this guy is so stupid. You can hedge your Bitcoin if you want to and give up some of that upside if you feel you need to, but to have no exposure is like an admission that everyone who's got any money at Bridgewater should take it out immediately because this guy is a moron.
jeez. Right. Well, let's get Ray Dalio on Twitter and tell him that he's a moron, and that'll be good. So let me see any more comments here. Somebody, Kimberly, says that I will make some Kaiser Report Bitcoin apparel to distribute in New Zealand. Yes, we need some more Kaiser Report apparel. Like that is definitely necessary. Everybody wants to dress like Max, so.
Look, Fluffy Pony's winning the swag game. Look, Fluffy Pony. Look at this. Fluffy Pony's got the Fluffy Pony thing here.
Hey, that's South African dude.
Right.
Marula.
They're winning the swag game. You know, we're not even in that game. Our swag game is lacking.
Oh,
The Fluffy Pony is ahead. He's way ahead. Who's that?
look
Oh,
at this. Citadel 21. I got sent this. Hodl Not sent me this. So,
oh.
everybody has to go get this Citadel 21. They want Max. They want you to write something for it.
It looks suitably radical. I may have to pen something. I used to have a nom de plume when I was living in London. Remember Sabine Lecoq?
Yes.
I used to write for a magazine under the name Sabine Lecoq. I'm remembering.
Don't
Oh
ruin
yeah,
it.
what was the name of that magazine? I forget.
Yeah, it was something weird that Ian Allison published. He's now a Bitcoin journalist, but back then that was like in 2005 or 6 that we first met him before
Yeah.
Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And Max was doing some stand-up stuff in London, and Ian Allison wrote about you a few times, and then he started a magazine about the pores. It was a quote from how the Brits are. It was a quote from some 18th century British fabulist or something.
Yeah, during the 2008 crisis, there was a lot of angst all over the world. People were generally concerned, and little zines popped up and people talked about it. And Max Kaiser and Stacy Herbert and Kaiser Report were huge and in places that were really suffering like Greece and Ireland. And, that was like the whole period of that time.
I posted some photos of the hotel lobby window. Did you see that? To Orange Pill Podcast Twitter handle. I posted the photo from because I'm just going through. Oh yes, because I'm planning on getting rid of Facebook because that area is just too freaking scary. I don't like to. If you've ever visited an old folks home, I had grandparents and stuff like that in there. They have a section called the memory ward, and it's really sad. Like it's hard to go there because people have lost their minds, and that's like going in Facebook. It's like it leaves you nauseous, feeling like just how horrible the situation. Like
Yeah, everyone's trying to be Nurse Ratchet.
yeah, but they don't realize that they're actually one of the patients. Like they're the ones screaming about daddy, some like 90-year-old woman who doesn't know where she is and just screaming about daddy. Can I go to the
Remember
bathroom?
Danny Aiello and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest screaming, "That's my cigarettes!
Yeah.
That's my cigarette!"
That, to me, is what it looks like on Facebook. And so, anyway, there's a function, there's a some sort of way you could download all your photos, and I did that. So going
Oh
back
yeah,
to like
guess that.
2009, and it was really interesting because there were so many things I forgot about, and then that photo, which I hadn't been able to find for, I was like, oh, I wish I still had that photo. I remember having some photos of that smashed window, like perfectly round hole where they smashed through
Oh yeah.
that barricaded front door, that and that really thick glass, as if, like, I guess this is a regular event in Athens where they break down doors and stuff. So it was fortified, but they smashed through it. But that was the day after the Troika deal and that
Hmm.
those protests. And I have all those photos and stills from the huge fight that happened. Like, we were on the second floor, so right over the St. Thomas Square, and Black Bloc met these nationalists. Right, like when the Black Bloc walked in, and they met nationalists, and a huge rumble started, and they rolled down the hill right in front of our hotel room, and then the Black Bloc guys, like, unmasked amongst them an undercover cop, and they, like, all undercover cops there have to carry a badge with them, and they got his badge, and they were like holding him down, but there was so much tear gas that I couldn't see, like, even though it was like just a few feet down, like my eyes were like watering so heavily, and I was just filming with our camera, and then you see this moment where all these Black Bloc guys with all that Metamucil sort of stuff, the white powder on their face to keep them from getting tear gassed, like the pain. They all looked up at me and they were like that. And I was like, "What? I'm just filming. I'm not doing anything." And they started like throwing huge rocks at me. And we ran up to the bar at the top to, barricade. Everybody in the hotel barricaded themselves into the bar up top, and there were a bunch of like these very, very old British ladies up there, like all very proper. And oh, just another riot. It's not too bad. It's really not too bad. But when we got in the elevator, and there was there was one guy in there who was like black clad and had a balaclava on, and we are like, what floor? Yeah,
Right. Elevator music playing.
yeah.
Da, 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 da. Smoke pouring off his vest, grenades on his belt. Dee, 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 da, da, da. Well, small correction. It's not Danny Aiello. I'm trying to think. Who was the guy who played in Taxi, that TV show? Who played the guy who ran the
Oh,
taxi shop?
that's not because you have Danny Aiello in my head.
Yeah.
I can't get
Now
his
he's in
name
that
out of.
show. It always sunny in Philadelphia.
Yeah, yeah, the short little guy. What's his
Yeah,
name?
short guy. Yeah.
Oh, like, how old are we that we can't remember this? The Danny DeVito.
Danny DeVito, yeah, he was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, screaming about his cigarettes.
Yes, I remember that scene very well. I remember because I was pretty young when it came out, and I remember it really disturbed me.
It is a very disturbing film. In the '70s, they put out these films that were not glossing over a lot of problems. So you had One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You had Alan Pakula had three films: All the President's Men, The Parallax View,
We
and
have nothing like that now.
Rollover. I think he made Rollover as well, which is pretty good with Chris Christopherson.
Those three films, though, that you just mentioned, such awesome political commentary from a genuine resistance sort. This is what the media no longer does. This is what we no longer have in America. Any filmmaker, any media content creator, any artist who will stand up against the state, right? They don't. Instead we have these like bootlickers, the entire media complex, that smug industrial complex. All they do is like point out the people to go kneecap for the state. Hey, look, I mean, how bizarre is it? Like, no, why doesn't anybody mention the fact that if you tune into MSNBC, literally, and CNN, by the way, half of their presenters are former FBI, CIA, or NSA, and they think that's normal. And you're like, that's not normal. These people aren't
No,
normal.
it's state-run media. If you go to
Well,
YouTube and you see underneath the video and it says this is state-run media, but they don't apply that to MSNBC, that's obviously wrong because it is state-run. All the guests are from the War Department, and they're always pushing a war.
Well, I don't mind state-run media. I think RT is great. I think BBC is great. I think France 24 is great. I think Al Jazeera is great. But these guys aren't great. What they are is deep state run media. These are not state. These are not transparent. With the state, you are allowed to do freedom of information. You are allowed to gather data on what sources they're using, how they're doing, what their
Right. They're
finances
just
are,
saying
and
they
things
should
like that.
apply similar standards.
They
That's all.
should get a deep state media.
Deep state media. But the 70s and these films of the 70s. Remember when television became huge, late 60s, 70s. Hollywood, the thinking was that it was going to be completely overrun and it would disappear completely. So you had then the independent filmmakers like Dennis Hopper with Easy Rider, and that cost less than $1 million to make, and it made 200 or $300 million or something like that. So then you had this whole wave of independent cinema with Martin Scorsese and that whole generation of independent filmmakers. It made all those great films of the 70s, but by the 80s, it was Reaganism, and the Hollywood became totally corporatized again, and that shut that era.
Yeah. Though then there was as well a brief period um, of the small independent film started at the Sundance Institute. They weren't political like that stuff of all the guys that came out of the Roger Corman school of like super cheap B movies. That's where Scorsese and Spielberg and all those guys came out of that. Jack Nicholson, they came out of these really low budget sort of filmmaking thing, and it was more a political time. Then in the so from the late 80s and early 90s, you had all those Sundance Film Institute friends. My friend Alberto Garcia was largely responsible for that. He was like picking a lot of these films and helping nurture these young filmmakers like Steven Soderbergh, famously with Sex, Lies, and
Yeah, I
Videotape
was
up
just
there.
thinking of that.
Yeah, yeah, that came up through there. Quentin Tarantino also came up through there. But obviously those aren't really political films. They're more like small cultural sort of films.
Yeah, yeah. Sex, Lies, and Videotape defined that beginning of that era for sure, and it was a small. And Jim Jarmusch, I think, would fit into that category. His film Stranger Than Paradise is a really remarkable film for a lot of different ways. You might want to check that out if you're unfamiliar with Jim Jarmusch's film Stranger Than Paradise. It's a fantastic film on many many levels. Strikingly, there's very few setups in that film. So typically, if you watch a movie, every shot is a different setup. So like when during the film Psycho with Hitchcock during the shower scene, that was like 68 setups
Yeah,
for one 10-second burst of film. But with Stranger Than Paradise, the whole film is like done in less than 50 setups. It's just like these long shots that the camera doesn't move. He just plops it down in Battery Park and they look at the Staten Island Ferry or something for like 30 seconds. And then the actors kind of, it's similar to, who was that great independent filmmaker who was in Rosemary's Baby as an actor? And
Sam.
not Sam, he was, he made films with Peter Falk and Gina Rowland and
Cast Mia Farrow, John Cassavetes.
yeah,
Yeah,
John Cassavetes. So he was another product of that indie independent
I love
days.
Minnie and Moskowitz.
Yeah.
That's what Double Down, our title images. That's taken from Minnie and Moskowitz. So that's the poster art for Minnie and Moskowitz.
All right.
But I used to when I was lived in Los Angeles and worked in Hollywood. I was really good friends with that guy Richard Edson, who stars in all those Jim Jarmusch films.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I can't remember how I met him, or I guess. And then I moved. Right, I moved to London, so I just lost touch with everybody. But I mean, I guess I just met him around. That's what you did back then.
Oh
But
yeah. Well, that's the thing about Los Angeles, right? Everybody you meet everybody is just out there walking around.
he's from New Rochelle. He was born in New Rochelle.
Yeah, right. That's where I was born.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, with well, the thing about Los Angeles, you mentioned, the saying is in Los Angeles, if you think you saw somebody famous, you did.
Yeah.
Right. But that's even if you go to Sundance, it's really incredible because the Sundance main street is literally 500 A-list celebrities just kind of crammed in on Main Street. Obviously, it does get a bit crazy at time, but it's pretty fun. It's fun.
Yeah, it is. I haven't been since Alberto left, and he left because it got too corporate, and
Yeah.
and he was getting more pressure to basically accept the films of famous people, and well, especially like heads of studios, like their sons or daughters made a film, and he had to watch it. But I would go to the Sundance like offices, these warehouse space,
Yeah.
and he would watch all of these films for hours and hours. You could
Mm.
show up at 4 in the morning and you could bet that he would be there and watching these
Wow.
films. So
Yeah.
he would watch hundreds and hundreds of films.
Mm.
But he was actually really interesting. He quit and he went and like moved to Australia with this woman, and they grow they have vineyards and they bottle wine and stuff like that.
All right.
But he would be like, he was so like that indie film sort of style, right? That really non like they're very very geeky, totally non-celebrity sort. And we would be out, like he was always at Michael Phillips Productions where I worked, and he would come over and fix my art computers for free, like
Yeah.
because
Well,
he was.
film is, technical. You have to. It's like for geeks. Geeks usually gravitate toward film and video for sure. Your friend who made Swingers. That was a great indie film.
Yeah, that Doug Lyman
Yeah.
from yeah, all my friends, like my roommate is in that. I forget where I was. I was out of town, so I didn't get to be in it because he just filmed it over a few weekends at that club we went to all the time. But on the Alberto thing, I remember sitting with him, and he was fixing our computers at we all had Macintoshes, but there were no play. This is before the Genius Bar, 2 decades before it, and he would take it all apart and fix it. But then, like, he'd get a call, and it would be Double R Superstar, Redford, and he'd be like, "I'm in town for tonight. Do you want to go to dinner?" And Alberto's like, "No, I've got this. I'm working on my friend's computer here." And I
Yeah.
was like, "What the fuck? Go to dinner with him." He's like, "What am I gonna do? Like, he's just gonna talk, talk, talk." And I'm like, "You're so crazy. Like, bring me."
Yeah, well, also Swingers. Jon Favreau was in that film, and then he went on to direct the Iron Man films, became a huge director. But he was living next door to me in Londonderry Place, which is Sunset Plaza in West Hollywood. So I used to see him. Really, I guess that would be just after Swingers came out. So
Well, we had my 23rd or 24th birthday at Doug's house, and it was a swingers rap party as well.
yeah,
So none of them were famous yet. So I hadn't seen the film, and then afterward, I was like, "Oh yeah, I kind of remember that guy being there." I don't. It was there were a lot of people, so I was like,
mm,
"Yeah, those were the Hollywood days." There weren't any Instagram or Twitter or iPhones back then, so there's like no photos of anything. It's just like
yeah,
weird glimpses of vague memories of like I only recently remembered, like, I used to know Richard Edson really well. Like, we went out to lunch all the time, like, and I'm like, I barely remember any conversation we had, like how I knew him. Like,
yeah.
I don't even know how I knew him, but I did.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. There's no Instagram at that time, social media, so all these things are just memory hold,
Yeah, so weird how.
or repackaged as like Quentin Tarantino made that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood film, and you watch it and I thought it didn't ring true really. I thought it was overly kitsch. It's one of my least favorite Tarantino films. But I don't know. A matter of fact, I couldn't even watch the whole thing. It
Which one
was
was that?
Once
Oh,
Upon a Time in
oh,
Hollywood.
yeah, I haven't watched it because you said it was so bad. I
Yeah,
think you saw it on a flight, right?
yeah. Okay, maybe it was on a flight. It's tough to watch a film on a flight, but one film that I always watch on the flights, I've seen it now 20 times, is All the President's Men. If it's
Mm.
in the catalog of films on the flight, I watch it all the time. It's just a great film, and it's when journalism meant something in America. You had journalists really pursuing cases and using high journalistic standards, and they busted Richard Nixon in the 70s. And Washington Post was Ben Bradley, who ran the Post. They had a certain calling as journalists, and it's just remarkable that the Washington Post today is in the pocket of the defense contractors and will stoop there's not no low stoop for them that they can go to embarrass themselves to push that agenda, and it's sickening in my view.
So Well, that brings in back to Doug Liman because he directed Born Identity, the first one. He produced the next ones, but I guess he was kind of kicked off them really from being director. But you know that his father was the special prosecutor that at Iran Contra, but also Watergate.
Arthur Lyman.
Arthur Lyman, yeah, and so he had Arthur Lyman had run-ins with the CIA and exposed a lot of their stuff they did too. So Doug, naturally has this thing against like the CIA, and he didn't go to them for Born Identity like most Hollywood people do, and they were really pissed off with their representation and the CIA.
That's kind of funny. I can imagine that conversation. Like, there's this kid in Hollywood. He's making a movie about, the CIA. Oh, yeah? Yeah, it's Doug Lyman. That sounds familiar. His dad is Arthur Lyman. Click. Zzz.
Yeah, but if you look at the first one compared to the rest,
Yeah.
You could tell the rest had more support from the studio, that because they weren't sure at all that the first one was going to be a hit. In fact, I went to the premiere in London, and it was Doug, Matt Damon. I brought my friend who's Nigella Lawson's sister, and there were like 4 or 5 other people. Yeah. It was in a small screening room because they thought it was going to be a big loser, right? So they already had the film. We watched the film, and they thought it was a turkey. So, I mean, that's my reading of it anyway, that they didn't really have any faith in it. There was no big, a Leicester Square sort of Piccadilly Circus grand opening. It was just like a small little screening. So yeah, they didn't think it was going to be so great, but it's such a great. You see why like Hollywood obviously likes bigger, special effects, right? And there were very few special effects. It was like you were in the head of this guy, and you really believed like, wow, imagine discovering all these skills you have and talents, like speaking all these languages, like. Right. To suddenly be able to speak French fluently and like not know that you can, like what you feel that every time you watch it, like you go through this.
The Born Identity?
Yeah.
Well, the thing about it, I remember that film is that all of the really genius kind of gadgets, if you will, or, in a James Bond movie, they have the character of Q, and he introduces Bond to those gadgets. Like, here's an exploding pen. Here, this car, does flies. But in the Bourne Identity, that was all done organically. So Jason Bourne, if he's being attacked in his kitchen, he figures out, if I take this drawer, I put this knife here, and then wrap this around it, I create the, and he's like, just very natural and organic, creating but that level of gadgetry, in his brain. And that was really fun to watch and really entertaining. And then the sequels, they kind of shied away from that. They went more toward a more traditional, like Bond, Mission Impossible type film.
Right. So, my God, time flies so fast when we're microdosing orange pill. Microdosing legendary investors. Let's see what the price of Bitcoin has done in these, 50 minutes we've been streaming to you.
Yeah. I wonder.
15,816, up a little bit.
Lovely.
It's up 12.19% for the week. And though, I mean, mind you, some of these, looking down, some of these shit coins have, I don't
well,
even know
okay,
them.
Bitcoin Cash has hit a new all-time low against Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Bitcoin Satoshi Vision is, I think it's at or about to hit a new all-time low against Bitcoin. And I just saw the nodes on Bitcoin Satoshi Vision are dropping radically. And so the volume on that's going to go to zero. The price is going to go to virtual zero against Bitcoin. Same thing for Bitcoin Cash. And, as Michael Saylor says, they were novelties, in 2017 or whatever. It was a good test to see how robust the Bitcoin network was and is.
Mm-hmm.
And it passed the test. And those two in particular have flamed out completely. They're going nowhere. So I don't understand why anyone to this, why PayPal, I think it is.
Yes, accepted Bitcoin
Right,
Cash.
right. They're saying they accept Bitcoin Cash. So they're incorporating it into their, that's like incorporating a known scam and a garbage. I'm surprised they got suckered into that play, but they'll find out the hard way.
Well, I think those 2 hard forks were the best thing that ever happened, to Bitcoin in terms of leapfrogging out of those early, pre 2017 Bitcoin hodlers. So it became a big story that got covered in the media. So it brought more attention to it. And there was for, especially the 2 years prior to this, really, really vicious civil war and debate and
Right.
just like flame throwing all over
The
the place.
block-sized war.
It was just horrible, right? And really nasty. And each side was so certain that this was, especially those big blockers were just
Yeah.
vicious.
We had the New York Agreement.
Yeah. So, for most people who are, not technically minded, don't know all the ins and outs of this stuff, it's kind of off-putting. You're like, well, is this somebody, some big names, right?
Yeah,
From
big names.
early core devs are saying, like Mike Hearn was one of them, saying, okay, you have to go big block and this is a disaster. So you're like, well, what do I know compared to Mike Hearn? Like, he must know more than I do, or Gavin Andreessen, like they must know more than I do. And you start to doubt, right? And so once this hard fork happened, like it got rid of all this like debate, angry yelling and
Right, then they
shouting.
could just compete on their own merit.
And immediately,
Right.
immediately you saw, oh, now I get it. That was a dumb idea to do. Good
Yeah.
thing we didn't do that.
Yeah, that was dumb. Not only the early developers, but also big names in the corporate space.
Yeah.
Right, big folks. The New York Agreement, you can look that up. So it was a whole coalition of folks got together to support the big block movement because they were frustrated by the rate at which core developers were developing for scaling. And so they decided that they were going to essentially co-opt the entire Bitcoin protocol. And as Michael Saylor calls them, the swarm of cyber hornets basically defeated them. And that's what he says. That's when he flipped, and he was like, wait a minute, I've got this all, I got to revise my thinking here. And that's when he started to get into the rabbit hole in a big way. So that, to that extent, it was a valuable experience.
Yeah. Everybody's on their own journey. Some people have to see, something like that unfold, or some people are just told, like, this is what Bitcoin is. And maybe they have a mind where they can understand code and understand money and understand monetary policy and immediately say, oh, I get that this is genius. Some people, and you see it in the forum board right now, some people just get totally wrecked. Who was that? Oh yeah, the CTO, David Schwartz of I think his name is David Schwartz of Ripple. He just said this week that he lost $300,000 betting on some of these token coins. I hadn't ever heard of one of them, but he invested in like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, and he lost 300,000. So people get wrecked.
Some
like
yield, DeFi yield thing blew up a couple days ago. Another one.
Oh yeah, yeah. And that's like, I think you lend out your Bitcoin to them, and like
they said, oh, well, they were in chapter 11 or chapter 7, and you probably never see them ever again. But you made your 6%. Yeah. But you lost 100% of your coin.
That's the danger of these of seeking yield, especially maybe one day in the future, once Bitcoin's like 250,000 or over, and it's more stable. And, there's a huge market for lending your gold, for example, gold leasing, if you want to earn some yield.
Lightning Pool is out.
Yeah.
Under Lightning Labs, they got Lightning Pool. And I believe, if I'm not wrong, it's a way to lend out into the pool and make an income. And so the difference is that here you've got credible developers at Lightning Labs. And with all the disclaimers up front, and they're not trying to hype people into
you're providing
garbage.
Liquidity. You're getting paid for liquidity, but you're not ever sending. Nobody but you yourself owns your Bitcoin, holds it. Like, you hold it on your own node right here.
Right. You got your node. Yeah.
Nobody else has your coins. So yeah. So there's loads of developments that you're not going to have to take that risk. I mean, I don't know. There's some pretty well-known ones in this space, and I don't know them well enough to know exactly like what you do in terms of custody of your Bitcoin, but I just think it's a dangerous thing, is my 2 cents. But you got to learn on your own.
Your 2 cents?
Yeah, that's my 2 cents, and you got to learn on your own. So this is a pretty busy week, so I'd like to wrap it up because I got to prepare for our Sean Lennon interview for the next episode of Orange Pill Podcast. I believe that's still happening, and with Sean. But we got to prepare for that. Max is going to do an interview tonight on Sam Tripoli's show. year in just a few hours. And
Is that
then
live, or not?
I
I'm not
have no
sure. I
idea.
don't know.
I'm assuming so,
Hmm.
but hopefully it's available tonight. Otherwise, I'm sure it'll be available within 24 hours. And then on Friday at 12 noon Eastern, we have the cocktail party with the Sun Exchange. We do have our we have our Sun Exchange cocktail Twitter Telegram group where you can go and sign up and make sure to do your questions now. And if you want to start buying Bitcoin, what we recommend is you use our affiliate link. You go to swanbitcoin.com/.
Yeah, where's my thing?
Max. It's over there on the count above the fireplace.
Is that the one with the lights on?
Yep, right back there. So go to swanbitcoin.com/max, MAX, or you could go /Kaiser, KEISER, and start dollar cost averaging. You could buy, I think it's $10 a day is the minimum on the daily.
Swan.
And you can also buy weekly or monthly or whatever it is, how you're going to dollar cost average. So, I know that the prices seem high right now, and we've been dollar cost averaging for years now, so we might not be the best to listen to, but you can listen to somebody like Paul Tudor Jones or Stan Druckenmiller.
Let me say this. So Apple Computer. I bought some when I was in Los Angeles when it was $16. Okay, and it had been a growth story. So that was in 1998, 1999. So it's called 2000. So in 2015, like 15, 16 years later, the price was at 150 pre-split, is when Warren Buffett bought it. He bought his stake from Carl Icahn.
Yeah.
And then it doubled again, right?
Yep.
So, and they considered to be his most famous, biggest, best investment ever is Warren Buffett's Apple investment. And yet he bought it after it had moved already from 16 to 150. And then he got it. So that's a great example of buying the high, right? So Apple was hitting new highs. And that's Buffett bought in at a new high of Apple, and then he proceeded to double or more his money at that time. So that tells you that the timing is, you can't just go by price. It tells you nothing about timing, really.
Yeah.
You have to dollar cost averaging is the best way to do it. You just hit it and quit it. You put it on, it automatic, and you forget about it. And then 6 months later or a year later, you're like, oh, wow, look at all this Bitcoin. I'm rich. And you didn't actually have to do anything.
Yep. And again, Paul Tudor Jones himself first got into Bitcoin back in like March, April. So he was paying somewhere between $4,000 and $8,000 per Bitcoin for that. But
Saylor's up 50%.
Exactly.
That was like 4 months ago, he got into it.
But Paul Tudor Jones got in at $4,000 to $8,000, and he says on CNBC just recently that he liked it even more at $13,000 than he did back then. So this is the mindset of a guy who's a billionaire and a multi-decade successful hedge fund manager. Same with Stan Druckenmiller. He says he likes it at this price.
Right. I mean, you mentioned Jesse Livermore. He's got 16 or 17 ironclad rules for speculation. One of them is that things that are high tend to go higher. Things that are low tend to go lower.
I did, when Jesse Livermore committed suicide at what was that?
I think it was the Biltmore Hotel, I believe.
Okay. So he committed suicide at the hotel. Our friend stayed there. We put him up there when Jim Kunstler, when he stayed there. But anyway, so he committed suicide, and because he was down to his last $5 million, and he felt like a loser. I mean, obviously, he was a volatile personality, right? He was a mood swings kind of guy. But I did the maths on that, went to the inflation calculator, and it was like the equivalent of $25 million or something.
Uh-huh.
But he felt like a failure that he was down to $5 million.
Well, look, that's hard to say. I mean, Anthony Bourdain looked like he was having the best lifestyle in the world. We thought this guy had cracked it. He travels, he eats, he meets all these people, he makes these amazing films. He killed himself. Like that, I was shocked. What the hell happened? So you never know what people are thinking. But the fact is, he did, for the record, make and lose for enormous fortunes.
Yeah.
He was bigger, more wealthier than J.P. Morgan himself, I believe, at one point.
Yeah.
And he did write a fantastic book, Reminiscence of a Stock Operator, that is still listed today in the top 5 books when you ask anybody about markets and trading. That is the first book, the first guide. He invented this whole idea of you can speculate your way to being rich if you apply certain disciplines. And so that is now part of history. So that's never going to change.
All right. Well, that's it for this episode of Microdosing Legendary Investors. If maybe somebody in our group could come up with the meme for legendary investor, because everybody is asking how many legendary investors are there.
Yeah.
I think it's funny. Anyway, it was good to hang out with you on this Wednesday afternoon.
How many football players are in the NFL Hall of Fame? Like 500 or something, right? How many people are in the Hall of Fame for the National Hockey League? Hundreds, right? How many people are in the Wall Street Hall of Fame as a legendary investor?
Yeah, but
at least 50.
But you know hockey well. How many hockey players are actually legendary? Would you say 10?
200.
Really?
If you're a hockey fan, yeah. You'd say you could name 200 famous legendary hockey players.
But say there's a couple hundred legendary investors. There have to be 10 of the top. Like you would say that all hockey fans would agree of the top 10. Maybe 2 or 3 might not be.
Yeah, but that's a status above legendary. That would be immortal. The immortals.
Okay.
The hockey immortals.
Who is the most immortal? We'll end on that. Who is the most immortal hockey player of all time?
Bobby Orr. Obviously, I agree with Don Cherry.
All right. Let's see if there's a fight that breaks out in the comment section.
I mean, Wayne Gretzky scored a lot of points. Yeah, sure. But Bobby Orr had it all. He was defense, offense. He could fight really well in Canadian style. And, he's the all around guy. Okay. He's the best of them all. Wayne Gretzky is certainly up there. But I agree with Don Cherry that the only one, the immortal of the immortals is Bobby Orr.
Okay. Well, we'll see, fight Max on that next episode of Microdosing.
There's no fight. There's nothing to fight about. The fight's been finished long ago. I mean, this debate has been already done. I mean, it's over.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us.